Good morning, class. Oh man, I didn't get a reciprocation of that. I'm going to try again. Good morning, class. There we go. That's better. That's better. How's everybody doing today? So today, God willing, we will finish our study of Philippians, which means next week we'll start something new. And, I thought about a bunch of different stuff, and ultimately I thought, you know what? Let's just keep going. Let's go on to Colossians. Yeah? Yeah? Okay, we just took a vote. It was unanimous. So next week we'll be starting on Colossians. Oh, man, last week and this week, we're really in the meat of the stuff that I love about this book. We talked about the importance of training your mind, right? Training your mind. I think it was in a sermon a week or two ago. I asked where your decisions are made. Remember that? I asked you to point where your decisions are made. And every hand went here first, and then a couple hands went, My assertion is that our decisions are made here. And that what our brains do most of the time, what our brains do is rationalize those decisions. I can't point to a proper citation, so maybe you can just trust the failing memory of a rickety old man. We're on the same side of the hill now, buddy. But I do believe that it has been clinically tested that people will make a decision faster than they process the information. I'll save the story about photography class for another day. But it's a really good story about happiness and decision making. But we'll talk about that another time. I was talking about the importance of training your brain, right? Because your actions, you have some control over those, right? You have a lot of control over those if you exercise it. But your actions, everything you think, everything you feel, and everything you do, they are all part of a reinforcement loop. So that the things you do frequently become more deeply ingrained. The things you think about more frequently become more deeply ingrained. And your actions and your thoughts and your words, these things all have a gradual but powerful effect on your heart. I don't mean in the cardiac sense, but more in the spiritual sense, right? So it's important. It's important that you are careful with your actions. But usually we think about that because of the way that it impacts the world around us. But it is also important in how your actions impact yourself, right? I'm not gonna get into a talk about building habits and stuff like that, but that's a worthy topic for some time. So if we often think about the importance of actions because it happens externally, you can see how easy it is to dismiss the importance of wrangling our thoughts. I'm in Texas. I can use the word wrangle, right? Maybe I should have said wrestle. You got to wrestle with your brain. But it is important. And you go, well, I can't control my thoughts. Things just pop into my head. Well, that's true sometimes. But what you do after it pops into your head matters a lot, right? Do you keep your focus on it, or do you refocus on what you ought to be thinking about? So Paul's encouragement to us is that we ought to be focused on whatever is true, noble, right, pure, lovely, admirable, praiseworthy. Dear class, in the past week, could you share with me something that falls on this list? I'm encouraging you to put it into practice right now. Ken?
Something lovely, good health.
Good health. Yeah, excellent. What else? By the way, it's nice to see you walking upright and not wobbling. I understand it was a tough, was it 2 weeks? Week and a half?
About a week and a half.
Yeah. Feeling better. I'm glad to hear that. How about the rest of you? Something that falls on this list in the past week?
Doing right.
I'm sorry?
Doing right.
I don't know what you said, but I believe you.
Doing right, like following laws, following what you're supposed to do on the road.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Things
Yeah.
like that.
Play. I thought I saw a hand up.
No, but I was just thinking. I was thinking, our oldest daughter Chelsea got her wedding dress this week.
Oh, my goodness. That is both pure and lovely. Expensive isn't on the list, but if it was, you'd have a hat trick.
I'm trying to forget that thought.
That's right. See, that's what you do. You turn your mind from the thing that you ought not to think about and to the thing that you should. Pure and lovely. That's excellent. And congratulations. I know it's got to be real exciting.
Thank you.
Anything else from this week that fits on this list? Noble, right.
Admiral, my grandson Jared Ailes completes his active duty obligation with the Marine Corps and will be honorably discharged. Of course, the sad thing is he's not coming home because he found a girl out there, so he's staying in California for the time being. So I guess that's kind of lovely and praiseworthy.
It is kind of lovely and praiseworthy. Yeah, honorably completing his service to our country in the U.S. Marines. Now, he's still a Marine, obviously.
Yes, forever, yes.
Yes, Semper Fi.
Yes.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Anybody else want to volunteer before we move on? Now, if I had asked you for a list of irritants from this week, I bet you could produce those pretty quick, right? So this is the discipline that Philippians chapter 4 encourages us to do. Spend more time with this list. The irritants and the aggravations, they will always be there. They will always come up. But once you've trained your mind this way, and people won't always be happy with you about it, but once you've trained your mind this way, the irritants can start to fall into this list too, because you start to see how God can use them. Not all of them. I mean, But, yeah, so it's a matter of starting to see things, I guess, both from the sense of blessings at hand, but also to see things in the way that anything can be a platform for God to move. Yeah.
My hand up.
Oh, maybe
But
not. Maybe you're
actually-
stretching.
No, actually, I was going to say something. Back when we were studying this in a Bible study, and we kept thinking about those words and how can we remember them, because they're sort of hard. So we came up with, I don't know if you call it
A mnemonic device.
a demonic device.
No. Not a demonic, a mnemonic.
Oh, I thought you said demonic.
I would like to thank everybody for joining us for Sunday School today. Have a great week. God bless you.
Anyway, we came up with PLANTREP, plant rep.
Plant wrap.
So at night, if lots of things are going through my head and
Yeah.
I can't sleep, I say plant rep, whatever is pure, whatever is
Lovely.
lovely, whatever is
Admirable.
whatever is
Noble.
noble, whatever is true, whatever is right, whatever is excellent,
Excellent.
is one is in the word, and whatever is praiseworthy. So plant rep helps you to remember those.
Yeah.
And then I think about what have I had during the week that goes along with that.
Yeah, nice.
Today I couldn't think of anything.
Well, we're going to keep practicing. All right, let's move forward. As we've talked about training our minds and this stuff, I didn't actually finish with the front page. So we're going to reread verses 8 and 9, although we've kind of just been talking about verse 8, but we're going to We're going to reread it anyways. I'll do it this time. Finally, brothers, whatever is, you know what, just because it's 2021, I'm going to have this brief talk with you. Some more modern translations of the Bible might put a phrase in like brothers and sisters or something like that, because there's a great concern for presenting a gender equality, way of talking. But we're just going to talk real quickly about Greek grammar. And it's actually English grammar, although it's being abandoned. So grammar is fluid over time. So, that it is what it is. But in ancient Greek, if you had a mixed group of men and women, you could simply apply the masculine to encompass the whole group, right? So if we say that Jesus died for the sins of all men, we're not saying that Jesus did not die for the sins of the women, right? It's just meant to be an inclusive term for all the humans in the group. So sometimes when you get to things like this, unless there's a dedicated reason, you should think that it's addressing men exclusively. When you read something like brothers, it would be a really awkward thing to try and be like, finally, siblings, whatever is true. Like, that's just weird. But just understand when it says brothers, it really is inclusive of men and women generally. If there's a breakout between men and women, which happens in many places in Scripture, that's usually pretty clearly illustrated, particularly because he'll talk about things that are particular to men, or there will be a man section and then there will be a woman section. So, you kind of get the clarity of the thing. So if you ever hear me say, finally, brothers and sisters, it's just because I want somebody who in the room maybe isn't used to that convention, understanding it really does, it does apply to you too. English used to work this way as well, but for reasons. People are less and less reading it that way, so I just have to be careful people understand what they're reading. Okay, enough of that footnote. Let's get into the meat. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, if anything is plant rap, think about such things. Whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put it into practice, and the God of peace will be with you. What does Paul want us to do with his instruction? Put it into practice. I'm just going to use the word practice. Practice it. Being a church body that is so faithfully grounded in the idea of salvation by grace through faith apart from works, we, I think, sometimes tend to neglect this aspect of the faith. Putting it into practice is not a matter of your salvation, but it is very, very, very important. Jesus himself says, anyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a man who sees himself in the mirror and then walks away and forgets what he looks like. Some of y'all might be relieved by that. But generally speaking, it means that the mirror did not help you in any meaningful way, right? Put it into practice. And his list of the things that you've learned, or received, or heard from me, or seen in me. So again, we go back to that idea of mentoring and modeling. Put it into practice. And if you put it into practice, what's the reward? Peace. Yeah. If you gauge spiritual growth by how much you learn, what you're developing isn't necessarily a Christian. You're developing like a theologian. Now, every Christian is a theologian, right? Because to be a theologian, You guys are getting bonus content today because this is the second time I'm going to talk about Greek. All right, so the word theologian comes from two Greek words, theos and logos. Anybody know what this one is? We are monotheists, meaning we have one God. Polytheists believe in many. What do you think this is? God, that's right. I'll put a lowercase g because it doesn't necessarily mean our God, but God. And anybody know what this is? It means word. When you read John chapter 1, in the beginning was hologos, the word. So a theologian is somebody who has God words, somebody who talks about God. And you don't have to be a Christian to be a theologian. But anybody who is a Christian automatically is a theologian because hopefully you talk about God, right? But you can be a theologian and not be a Christian. Actually, they're not hard to find. A lot of, now what the heck, I got to speak truth. In many very well-respected schools, there are theology departments. They don't believe the Bible, but they teach from it. They don't believe in Jesus, but they claim to be Christian theologians. Your Lutheran seminary is not one of these institutions, okay? But, a lot of like Ivy League schools started as seminaries, but they're not teaching. They're not teaching Christ crucified for the sins of the world. They're not. The reason I say this is you can learn a lot about the Bible, and you can come up with deep and profound statements about the Bible, and you can come up with, mind-bending theories about how it all works, but it doesn't grow you as a Christian necessarily. This is where the growth happens. Yeah.
Two things. I've noticed on TV, on like PBS and stuff, they try to get away from saying BC. It's now BCE.
BCE, yeah.
The current era is considered, when Christ died, became the current era. I mean,
No. It's still based roughly on when Jesus was born. But we just, yeah. Well, and like, I can't blame them for that, right? If I am a hardened atheist, I'm stuck with the year, okay? Like, I can't just define the year however I want, but I can at least try and not talk about Jesus when I say the date. I can't blame them for trying to move away from AD and BC. But, I'm sorry, it is that important. It did change the world.
the other thing I wanted to say is, you're talking about what he's saying there is put into practice, everything is true, right? That's what we should do. I mean, every one of us has skills that other people don't have.
Yep.
Some have math skills, some have motor skills, some have organizational skills. And if we use them to our best ability, we're honoring God in the best way we could.
Yeah.
Because if we have that and we waste it, then it's like we're saying, well, it doesn't matter, and we don't care about you either, God.
Yeah, that's an interesting point I should raise here. So God has built you in a particular way, and he's loaded you up with particular skills and talents and passions. And when you operate in those things to his glory, that is an act of genuine worship. However, there are things that you are not good at. You're not skilled in them. You don't have a passion for them. Still need to do it. Let's start simply. I am not gifted with penmanship. But it's an important aspect of teaching, you know? So I have to do it. You may not feel that you have the spiritual gift, and it is called a spiritual gift, of hospitality. It doesn't give you a pass to be a jerk to people, right? You still need to strive to be hospitable. You may not consider yourself to be a gifted evangelist. But if the moment presents itself, you got to take a swing, okay? Because at the end of the day, maybe God wants somebody who's going to fumble through and speak awkwardly, because that is what that person needs to hear. Maybe if somebody was too confident or too slick, they won't hear what you have to say. Right? So, whether in your strengths or in your weaknesses, do everything to the glory of God. But it is true. I mean, there's a certain groove that you get into, a certain flow that you enter into when you are using the gifts that God has given you, when you are operating in the way that He built you, and you're doing so to His glory, that it's a very fulfilling place to be in life. All right, let's keep moving. Verse 10. Can somebody read verse 10 for me?
Rejoice greatly in the Lord that at last you have renewed your concern for me. Indeed, you have been concerned, but you had no opportunity to show it.
Okay, this is cool. You remember when I was talking about operating? This is a little bit coincidental, but remember 45 seconds ago when I was talking about operating out of your weaknesses? So Paul says, I think that screw is a lost cause, Don, just FYI. Paul says that I rejoice that at last you have renewed your concern for me, but you couldn't show it before. See, he is now locked up. Carceration. He is right now locked up, which means he doesn't have the freedoms he once enjoyed. Among other things, he's not out there making tents to support himself, right? Like he did in Corinth when he didn't want to be paid. He could go out and get a job, work the job and support himself. But in his present circumstance, he can't do that. He's at the mercy of his friends to support him. And so he says, indeed, you have been concerned, but you had no opportunity to show it. See, now he's in such a place that they can put their generosity into practice. You put their hospitality and their encouragement into practice. This is what I was talking about earlier when I started talking about how the things that aren't on this list can start getting included into the list. It's like, well, is being locked up in jail something pure, lovely, admirable? Well, under typical circumstances, no. But now Paul's in a place where he can see, I see how God is using this circumstance. He's given me an opportunity to witness to my guards, right? People here in Rome or hearing the gospel who've never heard it before. He's creating opportunities for this Philippian church to act out the sentiments of their hearts, right? Like, this is actually a really nice thing. Let's keep going though. I don't want to get so bogged down because I can see the finish line in our Bible study. So, can somebody else read for me 11 to 13?
I am not saying this because I am in need, for I have learned to be content, whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all this through him who gives me strength.
By show of hands, how many of you desire contentment? I think that it might be a consequence of the wealthiness of our society. But contentment is one of those words that people think that they want, but that is actually, how do I say this? It's not just that it's devalued in our culture, it's sort of the enemy.
There's a real conflict in our society between contentment, happiness, peace. Some people think they all mean the same thing,
Yeah,
and they're used a lot.
yeah,
You look at all the commercials on television, every product wants to bring you contentment, happiness, peace,
Joy.
and joy.
Learn how to dance.
And so we run into a lot of difficulty, and if you don't look at it from a spiritual point of view, what Paul's talking about it, you can really run into a lot of problems.
How many of you have cable? Like cable TV? You pay for that. But also, throughout the show, depending on how long the show is, 3 or 6 times or so, the show gets interrupted for what?
4 minutes and 28 seconds.
Okay? What are they doing with that time?
It's making me mad sometimes, and sometimes it's very funny because some commercials are good, but they're trying to sell you something. They're trying
Yeah.
to get your money.
They're showing you commercials. How many of you use free email services? Like Gmail or Hotmail or any of those things that you're not paying for it, right?
For internet.
How is it free? Yeah. There's advertisements. There's spam, plus your data is being collected for things as well. We are, so if you do a Google search, right, some portion of the hits that you get at the very top and in the sidebar, they are advertisements based on what you search for. Whether we're conscious of it or not, we are inundated at almost all times by advertisements, commercials. And I'm going to get back to what you said here in a minute. Because of, I want to be careful of this because I don't want to get too pulled off topic. But because of the nature of how wealth works, I'll just leave it at that. The way that people are considered to be positive contributors is they acquire money and then they purchase things, right? That's just how it works. And when you stop purchasing things, that's not really good for everybody else. And it's just the way of the world. This becomes difficult. One of the messages we got just after 9/11 was, let's show them we're not afraid. Go out there and buy things. Be a consumer. And that literally was one of the first messages that came out. I'm not anti-money. I'm not anti-capitalism. But I will say that there is a lie that happens in almost all advertisement. And it's a lie that we tend to believe. Ken pointed it out. Commercials promise you happiness and contentment. But there's a new iPhone coming out. Why? I mean, really, why is there a new iPhone coming out?
Because they can.
Yeah. Because if we all just would use the same phone for the rest of our life, the companies would go bankrupt, right? People tend to think that they're near the point of contentment, but they're not quite there. You know what's missing? A little bit more. And it almost doesn't matter how high you rise. I mean, there is a certain point at which any sane person goes, I could stop here and be comfortable the rest of my life. But at that point, generally, people are so entwined in the game of acquisition that that's just kind of who they are. But for most people, no matter where they are on the economic ladder, they think that comfort is a little bit more than what they have. I'm as guilty of this as anybody else. But the trick is contentment never comes from getting a little bit more. In the immortal words of a philosopher in the 20th century named Sheryl Crow, it's not having what you want, it's wanting what you got. See, this idea of contentment, I know I've gone through some pretty uncomfortable stuff to get here, but I want you to understand, if we really embrace contentment, it's going to be countercultural. You will be misunderstood by people if you pursue contentment. You think about the circumstances in which Paul is writing and listen to what he says. I have learned to be the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. How are you content going hungry? You know, usually we save contentment for that brief moment at the end of the Thanksgiving meal when we're so stuffed. You know, we stuffed the turkey and then we stuffed ourselves with the turkey, right? Like, and at this point it's like, well, I can't possibly have any more. And you do that sigh, right? Yeah, I mean, sure, maybe that's a kind of contentment, but Paul's talking about something that's on a whole different level. His contentment is not saying, I finally have enough. His contentment is saying, no matter what, I have enough. I don't think that comes naturally. Especially if you read about Paul's life, when he talks about himself before he met Christ. Because his life was all about climbing, right? This is the outstanding in my field. I was more zealous than everybody else. I was highly trained, I knew the right people, yada, 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 right? Upward mobility. And we read this earlier in the book. But all of that stuff I now count as garbage compared to knowing Christ.
Another real good character to study is Solomon in Ecclesiastes. Here's a guy that you would think had it all.
See, Ken's trying to weasel Ecclesiastes back into this. We talked about this before. No, it's good. I love this.
He had wealth, he had wisdom, and yet, where did that commitment come from? Contentment come from?
Well, the trouble that Solomon espouses in Ecclesiastes is, I got everything, and I was still empty. I amassed wealth, and I was still empty. I amassed wisdom, right? I became one of the smartest men ever, and I was still empty. I sought pleasure, and I was still empty. And I realized at the end of the day, there's nothing better than for a man to work hard, eat, drink, and receive all that he has as from the Lord. Because without God, you can't enjoy it.
I was surprised that over the years I've thought about several times is, of all people, the Rolling Stones, who are just crazy, wrote a fantastic song called "You Can't Always Get What You Want," and the lyrics are, "But if you try
Sometimes, you might just find
what you need."
you get what you need.
And it's like, yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
And even the rest of the lyrics are just really,
Remember, this is also the guy who couldn't find any satisfaction.
yeah, well,
We went from Sheryl Crow to the Rolling Stones. I don't know. If somebody's got a good Beatles quote in their pocket, we might as well get that out too. No? I have learned the secret to contentment. Whether I have nothing to eat or whether I'm full, whether I've got plenty of wealth or whether I have nothing material. Verse 13, this is the context for this very, very famous phrase, this very often misunderstood phrase, I think. I can do everything through him who gives me strength. That's not a descriptor of, like, you can broaden that to mean a lot of things, but when he writes these words, what he's saying is, I don't need wealth. I don't even need food to be content. You know what I need? I need Jesus. If I have Jesus, I have everything. And if I don't have Jesus, everything is worth nothing. But if I have Jesus, I have everything. And I don't think he's being overly philosophical about this. I don't think he's being overly spiritual about this. Because a lot of times we're like, yeah, but you still need food. Paul's saying, no, even if I'm starving, I'm content. How does this make any sense? What we get by having Jesus is an eternal perspective. I don't mean to minimize what happens in this life because this life matters. I don't mean to minimize what happens in this world because this world matters. But let's be honest, it only matters insofar as Jesus. Heaven and earth will pass away, but his words will never pass away. The coffee I drank this morning will be gone in a matter of hours. It's a little crass, but it's the way it is, right? The car that I drive already probably should be put out to pasture, but it will not survive the coming of Christ, right? You will. You will. My car will not. This building will not. Jesus will. And so Paul, I think, is a guy who recognizes that this life is fleeting. He's a guy who elsewhere writes these words that I frequently revisit. I consider these present sufferings to be not even worth comparing to the surpassing glory that is to come. Right? So no matter what your struggles are right now, no matter what the difficulty or hardship you're enduring, no matter how little you think you may have right now, for a person who will live for 1,000,000 years, what is 3 years in prison? What is 10 years of poverty? What is 60 years of suffering? Again, I'm not trying to be callous to these things. We as people who have ought to be working to alleviate the sufferings of the people who don't, right? That's the Christian virtue of charity. But we do those things so that people can see God's love through us. I don't know if I've shared this thought with you guys yet, but it's a thought I think is worth pondering. Jesus visits a man who has been unable to walk his whole life. Jesus tells the man to stand up, and he does, and he takes his mat and he goes leaping and cheering and praising God. Where is that man today? Where are those legs that we're healed. Jesus heals a blind man, and he can see for the first time in his life, but where are those eyes now? Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead. Where is Lazarus now? All the miracles that Jesus did, all the healings that he did, they were an incredible blessing to that person for their life on earth. But they are ultimately meaningless if they don't reveal Christ as Lord and Savior and God himself. And so while the paralytic whose legs have been healed, he's not using those legs right now. But that was a peek about what he's going to be experiencing in the resurrection to come. And right now, I believe he is probably with Christ, but not with those legs. I don't know if you see what I'm saying here, but what I'm saying is all these things that could have been suffering, they were a platform for God to do something, but the point wasn't for the healing. The point was so that they would see Jesus. Because once you have Jesus, you have everything. And for the millions of people who were walking around on perfectly good legs who didn't have Jesus, they had nothing. Paul says, I figured it out. I know this. I know the secret to being content, and it's not in having enough food to eat. And it's not in having comfortable, living accommodations or an extra set of clothes or a 401k or, fine. Those are fine, but they're not where contentment comes from. You want contentment, it comes from knowing that Jesus is everything. I can do all things. You could almost say, this isn't what he says, but you could almost say, I can endure all things through Christ who gives me strength. Where is contentment to be found? Jesus. How do we access it? How do we experience that kind of contentment? I think that, a good starting place would be for us to start recognizing the discontentment that we have. Discontentment can look like a lot of things. It can look self-pitying. It can look like jealousy. It can look like a general antsiness or whatever. But I think maybe a good starting place is to say, thank you, God, that you've given me Jesus. And then, whatever is plant rep, think about such things. The peace of God, which passes all understanding, will keep your hearts and minds together in Christ Jesus our Lord. Amen. Next week we'll pick up with Colossians. We got worship coming up here in about 15 minutes, so stick around.